Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Today I'm going to talk about oxygen cascades. Before we talk about oxygen, we have to take just a rapid look about the system which is meant for the oxygen delivery. This is the respiratory system. Respiratory system, we can look at it as if it is composed of two main parts. The first one, which is bronchopulmonary, which is meant for the gas exchange, and the neuromuscular, which is the respiratory pump, which is meant for the inhalation and exhalation. This system is responsible for the homeostasis of the partial pressure of oxygen, carbon dioxide, and the hydrogen ion. Because these parameters usually change with the change in the metabolic rate or the metabolic demand. So there should be some sort of matching of the ventilation in order to keep these close to the normal to satisfy the metabolic demand of the patient or the person. So the integrity of this system, which is the respiratory system, bronchopulmonary, and neuromuscular system, which is a pump, is important for the integrity of these uh, parameters or these items, partial pressure of oxygen, carbon dioxide, and hydrogen ion. When we talk about oxygen cascades, we mean this is the pathway of oxygen from air to the alveoli, capillary, and this then to the arterial system, and from the arterial system to give oxygen to the tissues, and then back to the venous side, and then to the lung. This is a pathway. We're going to discuss it separately, each item separately, and see what is the importance of each of them. This is an respiratory oxygen. Inspired oxygen, this is the oxygen in the air. We usually differentiate between the oxygen at sea level or oxygen at high altitudes. When you look, this is barometric pressure, which is about 760 millimeter mercury. This is at sea level. Water vapor at sea level also is about 4 millimeter mercury. So the remaining pressure will be about 756 millimeter mercury. This is a barometric pressure. What about the concentration of oxygen? It's about 21%. If you multiply it by this pressure, it gives you an oxygen pressure in air about 160 millimeter mercury. Keep it in mind. High altitude, when you ascend high, there is a decrease in the barometric pressure, but with the same concentrations of oxygen. So the partial pressure of oxygen for sure will decrease with the ascent at high altitude. Approximately, when the person goes to a height of 5,800 meter, the barometric pressure drops to one half, and accordingly, the partial pressure of oxygen will drop to one half. Look at this. This is at sea level. We have mentioned that the barometric pressure is 760 millimeter mercury. The partial pressure of oxygen in air is 160 millimeter mercury. When you go to Denver, the height of this Denver will be associated with a drop of the barometric pressure 640, and the partial pressure of oxygen drops to 134. In the Andes, there's also more drop of the barometric pressure to be 380, and more drop of oxygen to be 80 millimeter mercury of partial pressure of oxygen in air. What about the alveoli? It will be more or less. What about the arteria? It will be more or less. So this is a problem. When you come to Everest, so the barometric pressure drops too much, 253, and the oxygen partial pressure of oxygen in air. At the average is about 52. What about the alveoli? What about the arterial? It will be more or less. So this is a rule. When you go high, there's a drop of the barometric pressure. At the same time, there's a drop of the partial pressure of oxygen. At height of 9,000 meter, the atmospheric partial pressure of oxygen will drop to 45 millimeter mercury, and the arterial will be 25. This is bad. If something wrong happened, if this ascent is sudden, or the aeroplane at that height and become at once non-pressurized, so all the passenger will lose their consciousness in less than 1 minute. But ascent to that height gradually, some sort of acclimatization might happen, and this may give the person chance to live. Ascent more than 8,000 meter will not give. This is they call it the death zone, and this is the human body will not be able to acclimatize more. So the acclimatization beyond this height is difficult and cannot cannot satisfy the metabolic demand of oxygen or satisfy the oxygen demand by the body. High ascent or rapid ascent close to this height will be associated with acute mountain sickness, high altitude pulmonary edema, and high altitude cerebral edema. Look at these. These are for persons at the height of 8,400. When you look this, this is number one, alveolar pressure. This is the alveolar pressure. Alveolar pressure is about 32. Alveolar gradient is about 3. That's why when you look at the arterial oxygen is about 30. There's wash out of carbon dioxide. At the same time, there is loss of bicarbonate, and base deficit is high, and the patient is alkalotic. But the adaptations here is that the hemoglobin is large, about 20 gram percent. Second person, also the same thing, alveolar pressure, alveolar pressure of oxygen is about 27. This is a normal block, and so the arterial oxygen is very low, about 19. Carbon dioxide is washed, bicarbonate washed, and this base deficit. And also the same thing, saturation is very low, and hemoglobin content is large. So this is the normal physiology for a patient acclimatized at such height. And the compensation for the acclimatization is through increasing the hemoglobin in order to increase oxygen delivery. At the same time, the efficacy of the muscles increases by increasing the mitochondria, and at the same time, the mitochondrial efficacy increased by the good utilizations of the adenosine triphosphate by the energy, instead of utilizing 60% of the energy to adenosine triphosphate. This might increase to about 80%, and heat production decreases. So this is some sort of adaptation. What about the effect of FiO2? When you put a patient on a face mask FiO2, this means that you are encroaching on the expense of nitrogen. So this is, say, if you give a patient a face mask with 40%, this means that nitrogen will be 60% and the oxygen will be 40. When the oxygen goes down to the alveoli, nitrogen will be the same 60%, and the oxygen will form 40%, but is part of it is replaced by carbon dioxide. So the carbon dioxide plus the remaining part will be oxygen. So the carbon dioxide will have a part of this 40%. If the carbon dioxide is 10, this means that the oxygen will be 30. If the carbon dioxide is 5, so the oxygen will be 35. Carbon dioxide is a part of ventilation of the patients. It is not. It has nothing to do with the FiO2 or with the mask itself. So this is mask. Only FiO2 will have its impact on how much of the nitrogen will be and how much will oxygen will be if you subtract the carbon dioxide which is already present. The second part of our study is what about the oxygen after being inhaled from the atmosphere and comes down to the alveoli. This is atmospheric partial pressure of oxygen about 150 or 160, and in the alveoli it drops to 110. This is the system, the bronchopulmonary, and we are dealing with the alveoli down. The ventilations of this, the entrance of air or the minute volume is determined by the tidal volume and the respiratory rate, and this usually matches the metabolic demand. Increase in the metabolic demand will be associated with increase in the minute volume. Decrease in the metabolic demand will be associated with decrease in the minute volume. And this usually comes in response, this increase or decrease, due to the presence of such sensor in the aortic arch and the carotid body for hydrogen, carbon dioxide, and oxygen. And at the same time, there is a central receptors in the brainstem for the hydrogen ion and carbon dioxide. Another receptors for in the muscle, which are stage receptors. We have another stage receptors in the lung, like in case of pneumonia, and this will lead to some sort of tachypnea or the increase in the tidal volume and increase in respiratory rate. Also, we have airtime receptors. Increase in the flow over the trachea will be associated with tachypnea. We have another receptors in the hypothalamus, and this is evolutional in the high receptor. I'm talking about this minute volume because increase in the minute volume will be associated with decrease in the carbon dioxide, and at the same time this increase in the share of oxygen. This is the alveoli, and we are talking about the alveolar pressure. Alveolar pressure, oxygen came down from air to the alveoli. Here, this utilization of oxygen and production of carbon dioxide, but the part of the nitrogens will be the same, nothing to do with the nitrogens, 80%, and so the 20% or 21% part of it will be consumed by the body and replaced by carbon dioxide, and the remaining will be oxygen. Let us then see. If we look at the alveolar minute volume, total minute volume, if the total volume is 500 and the respiratory is 12, so the total minute volume will be 6. Dead space is 1/3, will be 2. So the remaining part, which is alveolar minute volume, will be 4 liter. This volume for gas exchange. What about how much does it contain? Oxygen, 21% multiplied by this 4 liter will give you about 840 ml. This is the oxygen content in this alveolar minute volume. What about the oxygen uptake? It is 240 ml, which is utilized by the body per minute. So the remaining part will be 600. 600 over 4 liter will form 15%. So in the alveoli, the oxygen will form 15%, not 21%. And the 6% will be that for carbon dioxide, or will be replaced. This is the oxygen consumed and replaced by carbon dioxide. So the partial pressure of oxygen in this case will be about 100 or 110, right? This is the interpretations for these concentrations, but simply we can calculate it, and we usually calculate it from this formula. Partial pressure of oxygen equals FiO2, this is room 21%, multiplied by the barometric pressure minus water vapor. Water vapor here in the alveoli will be 47, and in the atmosphere it is 4 millimeter mercury, but down in the alveoli it is 47, 100% saturation. So this is a minus partial pressure of carbon dioxide 40 over respiratory quotient, which is about 0.8. So the same value. So this is the mathematical calculation of the alveolar oxygen equals Fi2 barometric pressure minus water vapor minus partial pressure of carbon dioxide over respiratory quotient. So the alveolar pressure will increase with the increase in the FiO2, or will increase with the hyperventilations with wash out of carbon dioxide. Decrease in the carbon dioxide will be associated with concomitant increase in the percent of oxygen. But alveolar oxygen will drop with the decrease in the barometric pressure, as we have mentioned before, as we have seen before. So decrease in the barometric pressure will be associated with decrease in the alveolar pressure. Increase in the carbon dioxide in the case of hypoventilations will be associated with decrease in the alveolar pressure. In patients with COPD, similarly the carbon dioxide is high, and so the oxygen will be low whenever he is on the room air. This is assembly. So you have to take care of this. Hypoventilations, COPD, or a normal person with hypoventilation will be associated with decrease in the FiO2 and decrease in the alveolar oxygen. And this may be a cause of hypoxia. Again, we have to remind ourselves that this is the atmospheric at sea level and this is the alveoli values. Nitrogen will be the same. Here, this is nitrogen, and this is the pressure in the atmospheric pressure at sea level in air, and this is in the alveoli. When it comes to the oxygen, about 21%, about 160 in air, but here about 14% and 104, from 160 to 110 or 104. When you look at the carbon dioxide, it is trivial in air, it's 0.3 millimeter mercury pressure, but when you look at in the alveoli, 5.2 and 40 instead of 0.3, it is 40 millimeter mercury in the alveoli. Water vapor is of 3.7 millimeter mercury in the atmosphere, but here 47 in the alveoli. This should be considered and should be memorized by heart. We reach to the part, this is the alveolar partial pressure. So the oxygen will pass from here according to this pressure and according to the pressure gradient should pass from this alveoli to cross this bridge. This is pneumostat number 1, number 2, basement membrane, and this is the interstitial space, and then another basement membrane, and this is endothelium, in order to reach to this part of the capillary. So this is the bridge, which is about 0.5 to 1 micrometer. It's very small. So this is a block. It forms a block, and this block will not add more to the drop of oxygen from here, from the alveoli to the capillary. But if what will happen if this distance increase due to interstitial edema or the presence of certain fluid here or blood or pus, something like that. So the distance between oxygen from here and here, this will be large. So the difference between oxygen in the alveoli and in the capillary depends on two things. Number one, the pressure gradient. It's the difference between pressure here and there and the distance. Increasing the distance will be associated with a drop of oxygen here, or decrease in the pressure as in high altitude, decrease in the atmospheric pressure, and decrease in the alveolar pressure, so the pressure will drop, and accordingly the arterial pressure or the capillary oxygen pressures will be low. Another important point, these RBCs passes through here, this is journey, which is about 600 to 800 micrometer. How fast? This journey consumes about 750 milliseconds, about 3/4 of a second. What is the value of this? It's important this time for the RBCs to make good change of oxygen. This is a sufficient time for good oxygenation. What will happen if there's some sort of tachycardia or the flow of the blood is very high, rapid flow? This means that if the time taken by these RBCs to cross this distance of the capillary 600 or 800 micrometer in a time less than 0.25 seconds, this will not be sufficient for gas exchange. And this is bad. This is one of the causes of hypoxia. So the rapid passage or accelerated time through the passage of the RBCs through the capillaries is very important for determinations of the oxygen saturation. This part we call it gradient. How can we measure it? We measure it usually. This is a formula: normal arterial alveolo arterial gradient equals Fi2 multiplied by H plus 2.5. This means that this is value will be subtracted from the value of alveolar pressure to give you the expected arterial pressure or capillary pressure. So increase in the age for sure will be associated with increase in this block. Sometimes when you look at a patient with hypoxia, partial pressure of oxygen is low, and when you come to see something like that, is it due to hypoventilation or is it due to some sort of diffusion problem? Simply just measure and calculate the alveolar arterial gradient. You will calculate the alveolar pressure and measure the arterial oxygen pressure, and the two together subtract it and see is it normal as expected or not. If it is normal, this means that this hypoxia is due to hyperventilation. This is a normal person, and this is content of carbon of oxygen, and this content of carbon dioxide, and this will give you a normal pressures of oxygen about 100 or 110, and this is carbon dioxide will be 40. If the patient is suffering from hypoventilation, the nitrogen will be the same, but the carbon dioxide will increase on the expense of oxygen. And accordingly, there is some sort the partial pressure of oxygen will be less, and accordingly, the arterial partial pressure of oxygen will be less. But when you measure the alveolar arterial gradient, it is normal. So simply, if you have the patient is hypoxic, first measure the alveolar arterial gradient. If it is normal, this means that this is hyperventilation, which is not due to diffusion problem. But on the other hand, if the patient is having, see, look at this patient, the oxygen, the percent is high, carbon dioxide is low, this patient is hyperventilating, and so there is washout of carbon dioxide. But the patient is still hypoxic. When you look at this, why? Alveolar arterial gradient, when you measure it, it's very large. Although the oxygen is partial pressure, alveolar oxygen partial pressure is large, but this is the alveolar arterial gradient is large, so there is some sort of hypoxia. Sometimes the patient is, look at this, this patient is hypoxic due to two things. Number one, alveolar arterial gradient is large, but at the same time the patient is hypoventilated, is increasing carbon dioxide and decreasing the oxygen. Patient has been exhausted, like a patient with pulmonary edema. There's some sort of exhaustion, and at the same time, the patient becomes hyperventilated. So there's hyperventilation in addition to alveolar third gradient, and this patient will suffer for sure of hypoxia due to two things. Number one, alveolar third gradient is large. At the same time, there is hypoventilation with encroachment of the oxygen, so the alveolar oxygen is low. So to conclude, this hypoxia, maybe doing when you look at hypoxia, just measure alveolar third gradient. If it is normal, this means that hypoventilation for sure, the oxygen carbon dioxide will be high. But if alveolar gradient is high and low carbon dioxide, this means that the patient is having hyperventilations and the problem is diffusion. But when the alveolar gradient is high and carbon dioxide is high and the patient is hypoxic, for sure, this is a problem of diffusion and the problem of hypoventilation. We should discuss also another important point for hypoxia or decrease arterial partial pressure of oxygen. Number one, we mentioned hypoventilation. Number two, there's another important problem, what we call shunt. Shunt means that the venous blood passes or crosses the alveoli without being either totally oxygenated or without being fully oxygenated. And the cause of this uh, shunt may be an anatomical one or physiological or pathological. Let's see. This is anatomical. The drainage of the bronchial veins, they drain directly to the arterial system. This will add a deoxygenated blood to the oxygenated one. This will add something to of shunt. The same thing for the sebaceous veins, which drains directly to the left ventricle. These two together form about 3% of shunt. Sometimes the pathological shunt happens, which is what we call post-pulmonary shunt, as in cases of enterocardiac reversed shunt, ASCD, VSD, or patent ductus arteriosus, and which the venous blood goes to the arterial system without passing to the lung. So it goes directly to the arterial system. This will add. Another important point for shunt, which is what we call ventilation, perfusion, mismatching. This is normal, the normal volume of the alveoli with a normal with normal perfusion of the blood. So this is a good gas exchange and this good oxygen content of the blood. But sometimes this is alveoli is not ventilated due to some pathology or partially ventilated, but it is well perfused, so the gas exchange is not good. So this blood will not be oxygenated well because there is no sufficient air. So the oxygen content of this blood will be low, close to the venous. On the contrary, look at this. This is good ventilated, and this is some sort of diminished blood supply, just a small amount of the blood. This small amount of the blood will be oxygenated well, although it is not a large volume, but a small volume, so its oxygen content is high. This mismatching of variability will finally give you this oxygen content, low oxygen content. Low oxygen content with low partial pressure with low saturations. So simply we can say that the normal lung itself, this is the oxygen, this is carbon dioxide, normal alveolar gradient. Hypoxia may be due to hypoventilation, as I've mentioned before, decrease in the oxygen, increase in the carbon dioxide. Or just obstruction, and this is atelectated. So this is a true shunt. All the blood passes and crosses the alveoli without gas exchange. Venous and in the venous side and go venous in the arterial side. But another point of hypoxia This is a normal concentration of oxygen carbon dioxide, but the alveolar gradient is large, interstitial, or alveolar gradient is large due to this is intra-alveolar fluid or collection of fluid or pus or something like that. The last one, which what as in the case of hepatopulmonary syndrome, this is a capillary increases instead of being 7 micrometer, now can be about 50 micrometer, so increase the distance between the alveoli and the RBCs, so the distance increases by this way instead of increasing in this way or increasing in this way. So this is another way for increasing the distance between the alveolar oxygen and the RBCs, leading to some sort of hypoxia. How to calculate the shunt? Simply, if you put the patient or the person on FI2 100%, and after 20 minutes, which is the ranging time, measure the alveolar, calculate the alveolar, and measure the arterial, and the alveolar arterial gradient over 20 will give you the shunt. This is usually we do it when you put the patient on the ventilator. To start putting the patient on the ventilator, you put him on 100%, and after 20 minutes, just take your measurements. Normally, the shunt is about less than 10. If it is 10 to 19, this is hypoxia, which is responding to high FiO2. 20 to 30 is hypoxia, which is not responding. Is more than 30, this is life-threatening and incompatible with life. This is the assembly, this is the measurement, as I've mentioned before, alveolar gradient over 20 at FiO2 100. But sometimes you measure it by this formula, which is the capillary content minus arterial content over the capillary content minus the venous content. This is the arterial content, hemoglobin multiplied by 1.34, multiplied by the saturations plus the batch pressure of arterial oxygen multiplied the solubility constant. The venous also the same thing, multiplied by saturation, venous saturations plus the venous batch pressure of oxygen, the venous sample multiplies the solubility constant. As for the capillary, this is measured one. It's not. It is calculated, not measured. This is the hemoglobin multiplied by one, and this is the alveolar oxygen multiplied by the solubility constant. This will give you the calculated shunt. The following point, which is the arterial oxygen. So we pass from air to the alveoli to the capillary and the internal. Here we discuss the pressure in air, we discuss the pressure in the alveoli, we discuss pressure in the capillary. But when we come to the arterial, no, we will discuss pressure for sure, and at the same time the saturations, but the most important one, which is the oxygen content and then the oxygen carrying capacity. For the target point of this oxygen is to deliver oxygen to the tissues for the metabolic demand. How much we deliver, this is the oxygen delivery. That's why the partial pressure of oxygen will determine how much will be physiologically dissolved and how much will be carried by the hemoglobin, because there is a competitor for the oxygen on the hemoglobin, which is hydrogen ion 2,3-diphosphoglyceric acid and the temperature. And these two together will form the oxygen content. If you multiply it by the cardiac output, this means that how much will be delivered per minute. This is the arterial partial pressure of oxygen. The recommended target saturations usually in ULACA, this is should be considered. Just mentioned like that. This is the in normal person, the saturation should never be less than uh, uh, 94 and should not be exceeded not more than 98. Well, for the COPD patients, it is not allowable to drop more than 88 and not allowable to be more than 92%. At night or when at night during sleep, there is a drop in these saturations to a nadir about 90.4%, which is acceptable. Here, the oxygen carrying capacity depends mainly on hemoglobin. This is the globin part, 2 alpha chain, 2 beta chain in the adult, and there is if every molecule of hemoglobin carries 4 heme part porphyrin ring, and each one carry 1 molecule of iron. So this is the iron where the oxygen is attached. So this is each molecule, each one molecule carries 4 heme part with 4 iron to carry 4 oxygen. This is important. That's why when we talk about the oxygen carrying capacity, which is the relation between the partial pressure and how much is carried, how much to saturate the blood, how much to saturate the hemoglobin. So this is number one. At such pressure, which is 25 millimeter mercury, this is sufficient to saturate about 50% of the hemoglobin, what we call B50. So this is the pressure which saturates at 50%. It is 25 millimeter mercury of oxygen partial pressure will give you a saturations of 50% saturations. When you look at this, this is 40 millimeter mercury of oxygen will give you saturations of 75, and this is the mixed venous. When come to the 50 millimeter mercury, will give you about 88. This is the hypoxic level. This is a 55, 60, or from 50 to 60, and because if the partial pressure drops more than this, there's a steep drop of the saturations, and so the patients will suffer a lot. So this is should be considered and should be memorized. When you come to this oxygen dissociation curve, usually this is, we say, P50. This is the saturation 50 is due to the comes from 27 partial 27 millimeter mercury as a partial pressure. So the partial pressure which give you saturation 50, this is 27 in the normal oxygen dissociation curve. What will happen if there is some sort of shift to the right? To the right, this means that this oxygen is competed by high temperatures, by high carbon dioxide, by high 2,3-diphosphoglyceric acid, by high hydrogen ions. So all of these will compete for the attachment of oxygens on the iron. So this is shift to the right. This means again that the oxygen carrying capacity will drop, and this is a bad. This means that instead of 27 millimeter mercury as a pressure to give you 50% saturation, so we need a higher pressure, about 40 millimeter mercury of oxygen to give you the same thing, 50 percent saturations. The reverse happen. This is a shift to the left. This means that there is decrease in the temperature, decrease carbon dioxide, decrease to the phosphoric acid, decrease hydrogen ion. This means that the oxygen itself will find it easy to be attached to the iron without good competitions of these. That's why the oxygen carrying capacity on this shift to the left is high, and at the same time it is not easy for the hemoglobin to leave oxygen. So this is another drawback. That's why gas carbon dioxide, gas oxygen, the same thing as I've mentioned before. Carbon dioxide, hydrogen ion, temperature shift to the right, and the reverse shift to the left. Same thing, this is for the temperature. Increase the temperature, shift to the right. Decrease in temperature, shift to the left. We come to a very important point, which is the oxygen content. What's meant by oxygen content? How much oxygen is carried per 100 ml. So this is 100 ml of total blood of whole blood will carry 20 ml of oxygen. This is oxygen content equals hemoglobin multiplied by 1.34. Each gram of hemoglobin will carry 1.34 ml of oxygen multiplied by the saturation. So the oxygen content depends on two things, hemoglobin and the saturation. So if the patient is having hemoglobin 15, this means the oxygen content will be 20. So oxygen content 20 will give you a saturation to 100%. The oxygen, this is saturation, this is oxygen content 15 because the oxygen delivery, so this is the consumption of the oxygen will be about 25% of the oxygen delivery. So the oxygen, the oxygen content in the venous side will drop from 20 to 15. And this 15 on the oxygen dissociation curve will give you 75% saturation and 40 millimeter mercury pressure. This is the mixed venous blood. So this is number one. This is again, this is the normal arterial oxygen content with the saturations, and this is the partial pressures. On the venous side, the oxygen content is 15, and this gives you about 75% saturations and 40 millimeter mercury partial pressure. This oxygen content, as I've mentioned before, depends on two things, hemoglobin and the saturations. This is a normal hemoglobin and this is a normal oxygen content 20. If this patient is anemic and the hemoglobin instead of being 15 it is 10, it will give you the oxygen content will be about 13 instead of 20. If the patient polythymic, this is the hemoglobin is 20 and so the oxygen content will be about 26. This should be considered. From this part, we say how much oxygen will be delivered per minute. This is oxygen content per 100 ml. So if you say 100 ml multiplied by 10, this means that the oxygen content by 1 liter. And how many liters are pumped per minute? This is to be multiplied by the cardiac output, and in addition to these, to add the partial physiologically dissolved partial pressure of oxygen multiplied by the solubility constant 0.003. This is the oxygen delivery. So the oxygen delivery will depend on the oxygen content, hemoglobin, saturations multiplied by 10 to be in liter multiplied by cardiac output. Normally, this is the oxygen delivery per minute. This is about 1000 ml. 1000 ml for hemoglobin 15 grams, and this is the content will be 20 for normal saturation 100% multiplied by 10 to be in liters, multiplied the cardiac output 5, this is 100. What will happen if there is some sort of hypoxia? Hypoxia, this is partial pressure of oxygen is 14, as 40. This means the saturations will be 75%. So the when you calculate it, this is oxygen delivery will be 750 ml per minute. What about if there is a drop of the cardiac output to half? So the oxygen delivery will be about 500 ml. What about if there is some sort of anemia and the anemia is 50% instead of being 15 gram per liter percent? This is about 7.5 gram percent. So this will lead to the severe drop of in the oxygen delivery. Instead of 1000 it is 500. This oxygen delivery, which is meant to deliver oxygen to the tissues for utilization, and this is the extraction of oxygen. This is number 4, the tissues. The tissue will take up this oxygen. Take up this oxygen in the form of, this is can be calculated simply, the difference between the oxygen delivery and the oxygen content in the venous side. This is the difference between the two. This is the oxygen uptake. If it is divided by the oxygen over the oxygen delivery, this will give you the extraction fraction of oxygen. So the oxygen uptake is about 250 and the oxygen delivery is 1000. So the extraction fraction is 25. But usually we say extraction fraction, this is a percent, but usually we take care, we usually deal with the absolute number, which is the oxygen uptake, which is 250. Look at this. This is the oxygen delivery is 1000, and this is the oxygen uptake 250. This is 25%. This means that the total content per minute in the venous side will be 750. If it is divided, this is the oxygen content. This means that divided by 10 and the cardiac output 5, so it will be 15. 15, then the oxygen dissociation curve will give you the saturation 75 and the pressure, so the venous mixed venous blood will be 40. If there's increase in the oxygen uptake, these oxygen uptake, and in the case of sepsis, hypermetabolic state, convulsion, something like that, instead of taking about 250 ml, this is the uptake will be 500. So the venous content will be 500 divided by the cardiac output and 10, it will be 10. So look at this. This is a normal oxygen delivery, but a high extraction fraction. And so the oxygen content in the venous side is 10. This will give you saturation 50% and the partial pressure is 27. So this is very important. And this might have some sort of share later on in the circulations, rapid circulations, and the lung might be able to oxygenate this blood, so the net result will be some sort of hypoxia. On the other hand, if this the oxygen uptake is less than normal, instead of 200, this is 100, patient paralyzed, patient is hypothermic, something like that. This means that the oxygen uptake is less than 250, it is 100, and this is normal oxygen delivery, so the content in the venous will be 900 divided by 5 cardiac output and 10 to give you the oxygen content 18. Oxygen content 18 will give you saturations 90 and the partial pressure of 60 millimeter mercury in the mixed venous blood. The last thing, which is a repetition of what we have mentioned, this is the oxygen delivery, some sort of extracted, and the remaining part will be the mixed. This is the venous part, which is the mixed venous blood. So the mixed venous blood is the net result from the oxygen delivery and the extraction. Oxygen delivery for sure depends on the partial pressure of oxygen, the cardiac output, the hemoglobin. All these are factors, and also the oxygen dissociation curve, whether acidotic or not. This is very important part, which determines this is how much oxygen delivered, and this is the extraction fractions, which is high or low, to give you the net results, which is mixed venous blood. So the mixed venous blood, this is saturation, so this is the difference between oxygen delivered, as I've mentioned, and the oxygen consumed. Normally about 75. If it is between 50 and 75, you have to take care. Some sort of hypoxia which should be corrected. Between 30 and 50, this is it is a problem. Less than 30, this is incompatible with life. What about what other causes for high mixed venous blood saturations? This is maybe due to high oxygen delivery or decreased demand, as in case of hypothermia, anesthesia, or paralysis, or sometimes tissue dysauxia. Low oxygen mixed venous saturations. This means that there is either decrease in the oxygen delivery or the increase in the oxygen demand. Decrease in delivery, as I've mentioned before, this may be high ascent altitude, anemia, cardiac output is low, or acidosis, oxygen dissociation curve to shift to the right. All these things will be associated with decrease in the low mixed venous saturations. Oxygen increases the demand, hypersemia, pain, shivering, seizures, or hypercatabolic state. Can be done like that. Again, this is repetitions. Mixed venous blood. This is normal oxygen delivery, normal saturation, normal extractions, and so the mixed venous blood would be about 75 and 40. Hypoxia, as I have mentioned before, this is hypoxia, and this is normal extraction. So this is hypoxia, the oxygen delivery is low, and this is a normal extraction fraction, and so the content of the venous would be low, and the total per minute, and the content is low. Instead of being this is started with 15, now it is 10. So the mixed the saturation is 50, and the partial pressure is 27. So this is should be considered. You take care. This is a problem of oxygen delivery, and this will affect the mixed venous saturations. Decrease in the cardiac output, also the oxygen delivery is low, normal oxygen uptake, but here the mixed venous blood will be low. So this is normal. This is the mixed venous blood here. The content is 10, and this gives you 50 and 27. Same thing for anemia. This is oxygen delivery is low. The oxygen uptake is the same. And so look at this is oxygen content is 5, severe hypoxia, or the mixed venous blood is severely desaturated. Increasing the extraction fraction of hypercatabolic state or something like that. This is also means that the mixed venous blood will be low. Decrease oxygen extraction fraction in skin paralysis or hypothermia, something like that. The mixed venous blood is high, we discussed before. So they come to the last item, which is hypoxia. When you look at the or hypoxemia, the partial pressure of oxygen is low, and this is hypoxemia. These conditions where the partial pressure of oxygen is less than 55 or 60 millimeter mercury, or hypoxia. This is the failure of the tissue to take oxygen either due to failure of delivery or failure of utilization. When you come to study this hypoxia, take care of the oxygen delivery, the oxygen uptake, and extraction fraction, and what we call critical extraction fraction. For the tissues, will have a limit to extract oxygens, limit which is the critical extraction fraction is 50%. If the oxygen level is 400, and this is 250, which is normal requirement, will make more than 50%. So the tissues will take only 50% from 400 to 200, and at the same time the remaining 50 will be utilized in the form of anaerobic glycolysis. Hypoxia, we have different nominations for hypoxia. This is the oxygen delivery, cardiac output, hemoglobin, saturations. If there is a problem of the saturation itself, this is hypoxic hypoxia. If there is a problem of hemoglobin, decreasing the hemoglobin, this is hypemic hypoxia. If there is only some sort of stagnation, this is the sluggish circulation will be associated while increasing the extraction fraction, and this will lead to stagnant hypoxia. If the oxygen delivery is normal, but the tissues is unable to utilize oxygen, this was to call this is histotoxic hypoxia or tissue dysoxia. So this is the last slide, I think. The causes of hypoxia, you have to think number one, if this high altitude, this is the inspired air is low, or some sort of pathology in the alveoli itself, alveolar gradient is high, or some sort of shunt, or when you look at this is the hemoglobin, decreasing the cardiac output, decreasing the hemoglobin, or oxygen dissociation curve have something uh, with it. And finally, you look at the extraction fraction, which might be high, and this leads to low mixed venous blood oxygenation, which will not be sufficient to be oxygenated well. And this is the way you look for the oxygen and for the oxygen cascades and for the oxygen pathway. This is an example. This is hypoventilations for hypoxia. This is a normal person with the hypoventilations. Look at this is the oxygen and this is carbon dioxide. Normal nitrogens. The oxygen 6%. This is alveolar oxygen, so it will be about 42. If the patient is 20, age 20 years, so this is alveolar gradient to 20 by 21, and this will give you the block 6.5. 6.5 minus this is 42 minus 6.5 will give you this is the expected arterial oxygens will be 33. If you give this patient FI2 40, this means that the nitrogen will drop to 60, and the carbon dioxide, this is a ventilation of the patient, so I cannot do anything for it. So the carbon dioxide is 15 minus subtracted from 40, so this oxygen will increase from 6 to 25, and accordingly the alveolar oxygen will be 25 will be about 175. This is alveolar gradient with this is the age 20 multiplied by Fi2 40 will give you about 10. So 10 minus 175 will give you 1 165 or 64. This is the partial pressure of oxygen, arterial partial pressure of oxygen. This is how to calculate. On the other hand, if there is some sort of alveolar gradient, alveolar gradient is large and interstitial edema, alveolar edema, something like that, this is will lead to severe hypoxia. If the patient is, look at this patient, the patient is having hyperventilation, wash out carbon dioxide, there's increase of oxygen, and in the face of increase of oxygen, also it is not sufficient to bypass this alveolar gradient, so this there will be some sort of hypoxia. And this is the second part, as I mentioned before. This patient is having carbon dioxide is high, oxygen is low, and this patient is hypoxic due to increase in alveolar gradient, and the patient is hypoventilated. Hypoventilated is increase in carbon dioxide on the expense of oxygen. Here, this is normal. This is a wash out of carbon dioxide, so the increase in the oxygen. But here, this is the retention of carbon dioxide and on the expense of oxygen. In addition to this, so the hypoventilated leads to hypoxia, decrease in the alveolar pressure of oxygen. At the same time, there is increase in the alveolar gradient, so I expect the partial pressure of oxygen to be very low. In order to overcome something like that, I think it's better to give oxygen if I'm masked in order to correct it. If not, have to ventilate the patient, wash out of carbon dioxide, and use other modalities to increase the partial pressure of oxygen. Keep in mind, hypoxia may be due to post-pulmonary shunt, ASD, VSD, or beta ductus arteriosus. Take care when you study the hyperventilations or hypoxia. Take care of the oxygen decision curve, whether shifted to the right or shifted to the left. Shifted to the right for sure will be associated with decreased oxygen carrying capacity, and this will add to the decrease in oxygen delivery. Same thing when you look at for the hypoxia, discuss the anemia. This is normal, as I mentioned before, normal oxygen content, and the arteria, this is intravenous. But when there is some sort of drop of the hemoglobin, this is the to start with, this is the normal for the arterial, and this is for the venous. Mixed venous blood would be very low. Same thing if the patient is having carboxyhemoglobin or methemoglobin. What about the remaining hemoglobin? This is maybe 50%. Also, it will behave as if the patient is anemic. So this is anemia, as I mentioned before. Will be associated with decrease in oxygen delivery, and accordingly, the mixed venous content will be very low. Same thing for the cardiac output, and mixed venous content will be low, and saturation will be low. Because in the end, the oxygen extraction fraction of oxygen will be associated with decrease also in the mixed venous saturations. This that's it. Oxygen delivery normal, extraction fraction, so the oxygen content is low, and this mixed venous blood dropped from 75% to 50%, and the partial pressure is 27 instead of 40. So this is the final slide. Scores for hypoxia I've mentioned before. Look at the inspired air, lung, and then the blood, what is cardiac output, hemoglobin, oxygen decision curve, and the extraction fraction of oxygens, and finally the mixed venous blood. These are the two managers, arterial, and this is mixed venous blood. And thank you.